welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris.
And my name is Mike. Justin is off on vacation this week, going to New York. So in his absence, we went ahead and reached out to a fellow movie podcast, the InSession Film Podcast, which is a wonderful podcast you should all listen to. And we managed to arrange an awesome guest to replace Justin. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, sir?
Hello, everybody. I'm JD Duran of the InSession Film Podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a fan of your guys' work, and getting to be the first guest on your guys' show is an absolute honor. So thank you for inviting me, especially to talk about some of the films we're going to dive into on this week's show, guys. I'm excited to be here, so thanks for having me.
Yeah,
and thank you for being here.
Yeah, actually, we, in this being our first time, got the time zones wrong, so JD is doing us a solid by staying up 1 hour later than he anticipated. Thank you, JD.
It's a little late on the East Coast right now, but I've had some coffee. I'm ready to go.
Nice.
And as always, here on the Casual Cinecast, we like to start off every episode talking about what is on our minds, which is usually the media we've been watching or reading. Then, for our feature review, we will be reviewing the new Alfonso Cuarón film, Roma, which will contain a spoiler-free section before moving into spoilers.
And don't forget that each month we review a film from the Criterion Collection, which is voted on by you, the listeners. Go check out our latest Criterion episode on Tokyo Story, and we also currently have a poll active on Twitter. So go vote on that, and we get to choose the next film that we're going to review. The options are Mulholland Drive, Le Samurai, and True Story. So make sure you go do that.
Yes, please. We have a couple days left on the poll. You have time to make your vote count. And then, as always, like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. Shoot us an email at casualcinemedia@gmail.com, or most importantly, review us on iTunes and hit subscribe. It would do us a favor. So with that, are we ready to move into what is on our minds?
Yeah.
I sure am.
Hey, real quick, this is Mike. I just wanted to pop in before the What's on Our Mind segment to throw in a correction. Chris refers to the showrunner of Parks and Recreation and Brooklyn Nine-Nine as Michael Shoemaker and never realizes his own mistake. The actual correct name is Michael Schur. We do know the difference. Just letting you know. Thank you. All right, Chris, what's on your mind this week?
So, Mike, you know that we guested on Cinema Recall earlier this week, the podcast, and we talked about Tilda Swinton. So I did a lot of catching up on Tilda Swinton movies. I watched movies like We Need to Talk About Kevin, and the week before that we watched Tokyo Story, so I've been watching a lot of heavy movies that I kind of needed to escape from. So I decided to watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I love it. I was actually rewatching it. It's such a fun distraction show, and the cast is just delightful. Even especially Andy Samberg and Andre Bauer, their dynamic that they play off each other is really great. I also really like Michael Schumacher, who also did Parks and Rec, and he also does The Good Place, which I really enjoy. So as far as distraction shows go, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is fantastic, and you should watch it. And it's also coming back on NBC because it got canceled by Fox. So it's coming back on NBC January 10th. So I'm excited about that.
What season is it on now?
I believe it's the 6th season is it's going to start.
Oh.
So it's been on for a while, yeah.
Have you seen The Good Place? You mentioned that earlier.
I haven't seen the 3rd season, but I really enjoyed the first 2 seasons.
Yeah. It seems like this guy, what was his name again?
Michael Schumacher? Yeah,
Sorry.
this is Michael Schumacher.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot there, buddy.
I just said it. Yeah, I don't know.
So it seems like his MO seems to be really happy TV shows.
Yeah, good people getting along for the most part, and people that you like to hang out with, you know?
Right, like none of them seem overly dramatic or sad. Like I've only ever seen Parks and Rec myself, but that is a show where like almost nothing sad ever happens, ever.
Right. I think The Good Place does get a little philosophical, so it goes deep in that area, but you like to hang out with everybody, and it's just a good show to have on in the background or to watch. It's a good escape show, is for me. All 3 of those are really great.
I may have to jump in on that too, because after watching Roma and a few other films I have in the last week, which have been pretty grim to say the least, or tragic in certain parts, I might need to unwind a little bit as well.
Yeah, exactly. I watched, We Need to Talk About Kevin, and I was just like, oh man. And I was like, I can't go to bed like this. I got to watch something else.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Okay, awesome. So Brooklyn Nine-Nine premiering on NBC soon, which will be a change of pace. So recently, I watched a little film called Thunder Road.
Nice.
Yeah, which was written and directed and starring Jim Cummings, who is apparently a very talented guy. Have you guys seen this movie?
I'm literally like halfway through it. I started it earlier today.
Oh, nice.
So funny enough, if I would have had time to finish it, I would have loved to jump in on this conversation with you. But I'm only about halfway through it, though, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, this it's like a comedic drama that has been getting a lot of buzz this year. And I guess the best way I can sum it up is it's about a police officer who is in the process of having a mental breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah. That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah. His mother just died. His marriage has failed. And he doesn't see his kid as much as he wants to, you know? So what I will say about this movie is the comedy does not always work for me.
Fair.
Especially whenever Jim Cummings, as talented as he is, going from comedic to sad within the same line reading is a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
That said, I think this movie handles a lot of it pretty gracefully, especially in the late Act 2, Act 3 stage, which I won't go any further into since you are right in the middle of watching it.
Sure.
But I will be very interested to see what you think when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I will say so far, it is pretty compelling. It's interesting. I'm with you, though. I don't think it completely works for me. And I'm not sure if it's Jim Cummings, the writer, the director, or the actor, or maybe a combination of all three, because you're right. It is somewhat awkward when he's going from what seems like a grounded character in reality to just being completely detached from the moment. And sometimes it's literally from moment to moment. Like there's a scene in a classroom where he's talking to his daughter's teacher, and the conversation initially is very normal, but he hears one line of dialogue and the next moment he just snaps, just completely snaps. And there's something about those transitions that feel kind of awkward. And and part of it is, like you're saying, the character is having this mental breakdown. And so he's very vulnerable, and, little things do kind of, compel him to, I guess, kind of jump out of reality and into that detachment. But, and I think from a character standpoint, some of that is really compelling, and you can certainly dissect that. But cinematically, I don't know if those transitions always work for me between that pathos and maybe some of the comedy that he's going for. But it is an interesting experience, to say the least. I can certainly say that with confidence.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys this. I saw the opening monologue, essentially, and it kind of felt like a play. Could this movie be done like in a theater?
Well, that's actually something JD just said made me almost make a similar point before you started speaking up. I was going to say the opening scene is mostly one shot, I believe.
Yeah.
And it felt very much like a play. His performance felt very much like a play.
Yes.
And on the stage, I think it would work, what he's doing, right? Because it's very theatrical and it's very hammy.
It is. Yeah. Same thing with the catharsis he has in front of the cop station that I believe is in the trailer. So like that moment is similarly shot from the steps where the cops are looking down at him. So, you are watching him like an audience member at a theater.
Yeah. A lot of like head to toe shots like that, wide shots that don't cut.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this, even his performance, might work better on a stage in that medium.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows? I would like to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all I've got. Thunder Road. Check it out. It's interesting.
Yeah. And I believe it's streaming everywhere right now. So
yeah,
Amazon,
it just recently
iTunes,
came out.
Yeah. So, a film I want to talk about is actually one that is, I think, a pretty great companion piece to Roma that we'll get into here in a little bit. But I recently caught up with Paweł Pawlowski's Cold War. And this is a film that's been garnering a lot of praise, some awards this award season as well. And I must say it is pretty great. I think a lot of that buzz is earned. And I think what I love about it is that it is a beautiful film about love. It's about fragmented relationships and the tension of time, which makes the murky era of Cold War Poland an appropriate setting where this film takes place. There is a central romance that kind of grounds a lot of the film, and a lot of it is frothy. It's very inviting, but because of the cultural and political complications that are at play in the film, the relationship between our two main protagonists eventually turns pretty grim and bleak by the end. A lot of people, I think, have been talking about this film as if it's this gorgeous romance movie and this awesome love story. It is not that way at all, fellas. This film is bleak, especially where things end, where things crystallize. It's quite arduous. But I will say, despite that, the film has a lot of passion and intimacy poured into it, much like Roma, which I think there's a lot of parallels within the filmmaking, because what takes place in Roma is very personal to Alfonso Cuarón. And in Cold War, the quote-unquote romance here is inspired by Pawlowski's real-life parents. And I think because he's so attached to those characters and what they're experiencing with one another, you can feel that passion in his filmmaking, which is why I think the cinematography of this movie, a lot of people have been talking about Roma possibly winning best cinematography. I think Cold War cinematography is maybe better. It's really great. Every frame of this film is a painting. It is so gorgeous to look at, especially some of the imagery where you have the main character of Zula. She's singing in a bar in Paris, and it's kind of smoky and a little gritty, and it's wonderful, and it complements her singing in the moment. It's absolutely wonderful. There's a moment where Zula and Victor, our two leads here, they're on a boat going down this river, and there's no music. It's just quiet. It's just them cuddling, and all we see are these landscape shots around the river, and it's just breathtaking. Or even that ending, where things go with our characters, like I said, is arduous, but the imagery on display there juxtaposes that wonderfully, because it's just so gorgeous to look at. I mean, just everything about the cinematography in this film is quite great. And like what we see in Roma, there's a couple of one-take sequences that amplify how a lot of it is staged and framed. I love Pawlowski's direction here. I don't think it gets enough credit. A lot of people, or at least a lot of the reviews I've seen, talk about the film's themes, the politics at the center of this film, the romance, the performances. But I do think the direction, drives maybe a lot of this film more than anything else, because it does mean a lot to Pawlowski. So I cannot recommend this film enough. Now, I will say there is a little bit of a caveat there, because the way this film is edited and the way he jumps around in time, we do cover a span of 20 years here. And because of that approach, I do think it will be hard for some people to grasp onto some of the politics, maybe some of what's happening with these characters, because basically what Pawlowski does here in terms of the editing is that he strips away all of the conventional exposition and background that we typically get in these kinds of, biopic kind of movies. And he basically just strips off that fat and goes straight for the meat. So as we jump from one space and time to the next, there's nothing to fill in those gaps. We just go straight to what's driving these characters. And I, for one, love that, because as someone who is invested in this movie and wants to do the work of figuring out what's going on with these characters, if you can find yourself in that space, I don't think it's hard, for one. But I think it makes the experience richer and weightier with where things go at the end. And for me, that's what I loved about it. It was an active engagement of an experience instead of just passive and looking at all the gorgeous cinematography. You have to work with the direction, and I love that. I think that works very well with this film.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah,
I love
that's
it. I
actually
can't recommend it enough.
Something I really love about the Coen brothers we were talking about the other day in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
Yeah.
I think that movie only really works if you show up wanting to engage with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
If you're sitting down wanting like a Tombstone type Western, you will not get it, right? Like you have to like almost want to dissect each film and like the themes and how they tie together to really appreciate it.
Yeah. And that's an interesting comparison as well, because when you watch Cold War, it in some ways it's not too dissimilar to Buster Scruggs, because when you watch that film, each segment is new characters, there's new conflict. And
episodic.
When you jump from one space and time to the next in Cold War, it's kind of the same way. I mean, the central characters are the same, but some of the conflict is different. What they're grappling with internally is different. And
kind of like La Dolce Vita, like the Fellini film, like that. You'll have one segment about escorting an actress, and then you'll have another one about wanting to escape the big city and hanging out with his dad. So
and there is connective tissue there. I think Pawlowski does a great job of giving you enough to maintain, the central threads of what's happening narratively, but you're not going to get exposition on these characters. You're not going to, each segment isn't going to crystallize in a conventional way that makes sense on the surface. Like you really have to, like you said, you have to be willing to engage with it and kind of put the pieces together yourself. And I think when you do that, coupled with the cinematography of this film, the jazzy soundtrack, which is wonderful as well, I think that just makes for a really invigorating experience. So, yeah, I love it. I absolutely adore it. So, I mean, as far as foreign language films go this year, between this and Roma and Shoplifters and Loveless and Burning,
it's a good year.
It's a great year. Yes.
Yeah. I unfortunately have yet to see Burning or Shoplifters. I am in Texas, where these things are not very common.
Oh man,
I know. So I am desperately waiting VOD for these things.
I feel your pain. For about a decade, I lived in Lexington, Kentucky, where things were not,
things
they
don't
weren't
happen.
readily available for me, unless I was willing to drive an hour and a half to Cincinnati. But yeah, thankfully, I live in Fort Lauderdale now, so I'm close to Miami. So, it's not Chicago good, but it's better than Kentucky. So I'm grateful.
Awesome. Okay. So with that, I think that does it for us and what's on our minds, unless anyone has anything else.
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Then let's move into our review of Roma.
Buenas noches.
All right, guys. So just to start off, we will go ahead and do a non-spoiler section for Roma first before moving into a spoiler section, but we will give you plenty of time, adequate warning, and a bumper, so you can't possibly find yourself spoiled. Okay, So the IMDb synopsis for Roma, written and directed by Alfonso Cuarón. It says, a story that chronicles a year in the life of a middle-class family in Mexico City in the early 1970s. It stars Yalitza Aparicio, and Marina de Tavira, and many more. I'll go ahead and kick it off. I just want to say I have been looking forward to Roma for a while now. I actually had to drive to Dallas to see this movie. Kind of what we were just talking about earlier, JD. I had to drive 2.5 hours to see this movie.
Wow.
I know.
2.5 hours?
Yeah, well, after traffic, 2.5.
That's dedication. I love it.
Well, but here's the thing. I also planned to see The Favorite as well.
Oh, nice.
Which made the whole trip feel more worth it, and I got to see some friends. So ultimately,
Nice.
I'm pretty happy I ended up doing that, though.
Yeah.
I'm sure this film will be perfectly nice on Netflix, but it was also nice seeing it big and bright with good audio. And it's worth it for the sound quality alone, especially since most of us aren't going to be able to get the volume up nearly like you're going to be able to get it in a theater.
Yeah.
And this film deserves it, in my opinion. Anyways, I will go ahead and just say I enjoyed the movie quite a bit. I wish I could see it again before we talked about it, but it's not out on Netflix as of yet, so I will make do. A lot of people have been comparing it to Fellini's films, and I can definitely see the comparison for sure. The film feels like a snapshot of memories from writer-director Alfonso Cuarón of a very specific time and place. In this case, it's Mexico City, and I believe it's the year 1970.
Yes.
The film is very much looking back at childhood memories as an adult and trying to make sense of the whole picture. Mostly about his housekeeper, some about his mother and his father, some about his grandma. But mostly we stay on the housekeeper and what she must have thought and felt. And it's all shot in this great-looking black and white that is absolutely beautiful. Yeah. There are apparently places he recreated from memory, so it would be accurate. And there are also places that are filmed where the real-life events actually happened.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's a climactic event in a furniture store that apparently is now a gym. So they had to get the gym out of there and recreate the furniture store so it could be in the real spot where the real riot took place, you know?
Wow.
Anyway, but all that said, the film, for all of its painstaking recreation of real events, it doesn't feel overly romanticized. This is more a loving, realistic, yet somehow epic portrait of a woman he loves, a servant in his home when he was a child. It's very slowly paced, beautifully filmed, and you know what? If you can still see it in a theater by the time you listen to this, do it. But it should be out on Netflix on the 14th, and it is still well worth your time. Yeah. So, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, just like you, Mike, I am a giant fan of Alfonso Cuarón. From Y Tu Mama Tambien to, almost everything he's done, I've enjoyed to a certain extent. Children of Men is probably up there with my all-time favorite films. So yeah, I like this movie, or I like Alfonso Cuarón, and there's all the hype around the film, not to mention the the whole Netflix thing, and not knowing whether I would get to see it in the theater, if it would come close enough to me. That all kind of built up the hype, and when I did get the opportunity to go see it in the theater, I was very excited to do it because I wanted to see this film on the big screen very badly.
It's true. He was complaining about it for like 6 months.
Yeah, I feel like anybody that's listened to the podcast, I'm like an old grumpy man, like, put those movies in the theaters. I've been very happy about it. But and the other thing, I have to give Netflix credit here, because without Netflix, we may not have gotten this film. Whether it was in the theater or not, it's kind of this double-edged sword that we got going on here, because I think he had shopped it around to other places and they turned him down. So thank you, Netflix, in one way, and just put him in the theater. That's all I'm asking. Just put the movies in the theater.
Yeah, sidebar, I will just say that this year is the first year I feel like Netflix is competing with Amazon on on a buzz scale only, right? Like I'm hearing a lot more about Netflix movies than I've ever heard before.
Yeah, they're trying. They're actively trying a lot more than they did last year, for sure.
Yeah, between Buster Scruggs and this, I think those are the two biggest movies so far on Netflix.
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
at least the ones I hear about the most, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, this year they also had 22 July, which was a pretty significant one from Paul Greengrass. So, and for us cinephiles, they also had like Hold the Dark this year as well.
Right, I saw that.
From a prominent,
Yeah,
The Other Side of the Wind.
Yeah.
Other Side of the Wind. Yeah, that's a pretty
can't
big
forget
one.
that
Yeah,
one.
absolutely.
That's true. Yeah. So anyway, they're definitely upping their game. And I got to say, if this is what the future looks like with Netflix plays by the rules and like tries to make films a big deal, I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, all that being said,
Sorry,
I was
Chris.
super. Oh, no. It's all right. That was an interesting sidebar. But all that hype kind of made me a little bit worried that I had overhyped it for myself. But all that being said, this movie is really quite remarkable. I'm tempted. I know I've only seen it the once, and I'm tempted to say things like best movie of the year and the M word, like masterpiece. But
Right.
I really want to put some time and distance between this movie before I say things like that.
Sure.
And also, I need to catch up on some other films from this year, like The Favorite that Mike saw recently, and Burning and other movies. But man, I really love this film. This movie is shot so exquisitely, and in the What's on Our Mind segment, if Cold War looks better than Roma, I'm all about that.
Yeah.
The rest of the movie could be bad, but if it looks as good as Roma does, or better, I'm in.
Yeah. Get ready then. Get ready,
I can't wait.
You'll be in.
Yeah.
I'm in. Yeah, everything that's happening when you're watching this film, there's constantly something dancing or going on in the background. Much like you said, Mike, with like Fellini's films, there's always something going on in all the little corners of the screen, and the story is heart-wrenching and compelling. I was so into it that it was all I could do to keep from ugly crying in a public place. People that I was sitting next to were passing tissues around as the film went on, and so everybody in this audience was just captured
They were there
by
for it. They were
there,
Yeah.
and they were there right with me. I actually made this whimpering noise trying to cough down tears. I was like, woo, it was pretty embarrassing, to be honest. But
it certainly sounds like it. Goodness.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
But we'll get into more details about it later. Just suffice it to say, if you have the opportunity to see this in the theater, go see it in the theater. If not, you get to watch it on Netflix, and that's great too. But I really recommend everybody watch this film.
I really love this film as well. And like you guys, I'm a big fan of Alfonso Cuarón. This was easily one of my most anticipated films of the year. And as I was saying earlier with Cold War, you can tell that this was something close to the chest for Cuarón, because like you were saying, Mike, it's a love letter from Cuarón to this person that he admired quite greatly. There's a compassion and a reverence to the film that I think glistens from the opening frame to the very last. It's Cuarón looking into his past and acknowledging how impactful this one person was in his early life and giving her a sweet and tender thank you. And as a result, the film is so beautiful in every way as he tries to grapple with the broader scope of who she was as an individual with her own problems, as well as being this maid who simultaneously has this job to do and probably is sometimes hesitant with certain aspects of the job, but she no doubt loves this family, especially the children, something that clearly had a meaningful effect on Cuarón. And I think he manages to evoke something quite poignant regarding both sides of that coin. In terms of her job, we get a captivating sense of how tedious and thankless it is at times, while also understanding that she clearly has affection for these children. And there are some scenes where those things collide specifically. For example, there's one scene where she's doing laundry on a rooftop and she's alone, no one's around. She's even singing a song about being poor. But then two of the boys show up and they start playing this game, and one of them lies on the ground and she mimics that and lies next to him. And it's a really beautiful moment that demonstrates how maybe unrewarding her duties can be on their own terms, but she's okay with enduring them because of the fondness she has for these kids. And regarding her personal life, we come to grasp how lonely it can be for her. At one point, there are some complications that arise physically with her, I'll just say, and it leaves her in this weird space of battling these new instincts that arise with the emotional baggage that come along with those complications. And she really struggles with knowing how to cope with all of that. And it goes to show, I think, by the end of the film, just how strong she is, that she can experience this awful, arduous thing. And it's something that actually bonds her closer with this family and the children that she loves. And I think for Cuarón, it's suggestive of how much he may have taken her for granted.
Exactly.
How he was unaware of her personal dwellings. And so he set out to explore her humanity and why he's grateful for her enduring those troubles to make his childhood as pleasant as it was. And like you guys are talking about, it is breathtaking to watch. I haven't even mentioned the technicalities of the film yet, which are elegant. We definitely need to talk about that. But just as strictly in terms of character and the story and the pathos that comes along with it, it's an easy recommendation on that alone.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
There's something, before we get too far away from the way the film looks, I thought it was something kind of interesting, right? Like, this film has a very clean black and white look. It really embraces the modern digital black and white instead of trying to capture that grainy film look. So it's very much like looking at the past through a modern day lens, right? It's very much him looking back and trying to paint a full portrait of, like they said, this woman he loves. And it's also worth noting Alfonso Cuarón was his own DP for the first time on this film. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to touch on is something you mentioned, JD, about bonding through the course of the movie.
Yeah.
I think a big theme of this film is that men are no good.
Yep.
Men will leave you high and dry. And that said, I think the class structure in this film is also very interesting. Cleo is loved by the family, no doubt, but she's never one of them. And for quite a while, there is a very formal employee-employer dynamic happening.
Yes.
Especially with the mother.
Yeah.
And I even think at certain points in the film, the mother character and Cleo could probably lean on one another a bit more.
Sure.
In their similar troubles, because they're going through very similar issues.
Yeah.
But they never really do. There's a certain amount of formality there at all times. Did you guys feel that at all?
Yeah, I got some of that. I think towards the end, there is a little bit more leaning on each other.
That's the journey.
But
I
you're
think, if they had been that connected before, like, it took some terrible events and life throwing everything it had at them for them to really bond with her the way they do by the end of the film.
Well, and I think that's why the inclusion of the natural disasters in this film, I think, are important, because I agree with you that there's certainly a distinction of Cleo being a part of this family in a way. They certainly do love her, but like you said, there is an employee-employer dynamic as well. So she's not 100% part of the family, but there's this motif of catastrophes throughout the film. At one point, we see a forest fire. There's an earthquake that goes down. There's a protest that goes horribly wrong.
Lots of stuff.
And I think that is reflective of this destructive force of what it's like to experience the domestic traumas that this family is suffering. And I think Cuarón is suggesting that when you go through those things together, it does bring this intimate bond that I think is inescapable. And for me, I think that's what enriches a lot of the drama and the pathos that we see. And ultimately, my engagement with these characters and those themes of class that you're talking about as well. And those ideas of these females having to overcome I'll just say vaguely, the abandonment that they have felt, because that is certainly a big through line here as well. And I think all those threads come together so vividly in the narrative, but also through that symbolism.
Absolutely. One thing that I thought was interesting, if not a bit on the nose, tell me if this occurred to you at all. The little foyer that she's always cleaning with the dog in it. It's like a driveway. And every day when the father comes home, he drives this very wide car into this very tight-fitting driveway. And he has to back up and go back in and back up and go back in. And it's such a laborious process, almost like a tedious process that, he goes through every day.
Yeah, sure.
It's almost like a very on-the-nose visual metaphor for how he himself does not fit within his own family.
Mm-hmm.
He is out of place as soon as he comes home.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just thought that was actually a pretty interesting thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys got that from that at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I did really enjoy that scene. That's the first scene that it doesn't show his face. He's just backing up. You see his hands. You see him smoking his cigarettes. Yeah, I really enjoyed that scene. It was really funny.
And I also think it amplifies the gender disparity we see in this film as well, too, because he's so, I'm not sure what the right word is. He's just so careful. He's pristine about the whole thing and very careful. And so it just kind of sets him up to be kind of this isolated figure who has kind of this throne and he's on top of this family. And then later on in the film, that same car is driven by Sophia, the mother character, and she does not treat that car the same. We'll just say that.
No, she doesn't.
And I think that is also indicative of, again, that turmoil that she is having to experience at the hands of this guy that, maybe the family thought was impeccable, right? He was this king, and it turns out that he was, well, anything but that. So I find that symbolism also quite interesting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
But can I also, sorry to, I guess, keep talking here, but you were bringing up that garage area, and I wanted to I guess kind of bounce off of that as well, because one of my favorite components to this film is the opening and closing shots of the film. The opening of the film is quite stunning. It's this stationary close-up shot on the tiled floor of that garage, and we see water being brushed across it, assuming that Cleo is cleaning up that area. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but as the water flows across the screen, you can see the reflection of the sky in the water, almost suggesting that maybe brighter days are ahead or something grander is attainable in the future. And I love how the closing shot of the film brings connective tissue to that, where we see Cleo ascending up a set of stairs with the camera pointing directly at that clear sky, at that brighter day, alluding to the idea that Cleo's future is no longer murky or dreary, but maybe more bright and optimistic, given everything that she had gone through with the family. And I found that absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I was going to actually mention the bookended shots, the ground and also the sky, but yet both showing the sky.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because she's, cleaning this area, and at one point we actually see her cleaning up crap. I mean, dog crap for the, so, I mean, she's having to do this really dirty work. And then that final shot, it's like she's ascending into a greater plane, like she has transcended whatever level she was before. And I found that I could see the argument that maybe it's a little obvious, but I still find it very beautiful because of what we experience with the characters.
Yeah, I agree. It may be a little obvious. I want to hear what Chris was going to say in a minute, and actually want to mention that again in spoilers about the meaning and the behind maybe the end and the beginning shots and what that bookend actually means, and also maybe how the theme of the airplanes tie in.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But Chris, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, if there was any doubt that I had going into this film, that opening shot, I knew that that the movie was going to be okay.
Yeah, we're in the hands of a master filmmaker.
Yeah, it'll be all right. Just relax, and I'll enjoy this film.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I think it's safe to say we all recommend this film. What do you guys say we go ahead and move into spoilers, and then we can just kind of cut loose?
Sounds good.
Okay.
No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle.
I'll tell you what, give me one of them cigarettes you got up there. I'll tell you all about it.
And here we go.
So I think a lot of what you were saying makes a lot of sense, JD. The idea that she is transcended and brighter days lie ahead, especially when you compare it to the beginning of the movie and the opening shot. What I kind of took it as is life has thrown a lot at these people over the past year.
Yeah.
And through it all, they've relied on one another and they've bonded more. Through that, now that she has a family, maybe not her own family, but they still are her family now, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe that allows her to transcend. I wanted to talk about what you guys think the planes mean. To me, this sort of represents that life is happening everywhere.
Yeah.
While we're here watching this floor being washed, or, there are people on the ground working out, whatever, every time there's a plane in the background, we are aware of people going on with their own lives somewhere. Mm-hmm. People who have somewhere to go and money to go there with. Yeah. And it's a big world out there, right? But we're staying grounded with the people living their lives in this spot in Roma, in a neighborhood in Mexico City in 1970, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm in that same ballpark. I think for me, it's a reminder that there is a larger world out there, something that maybe Cleo hasn't experienced, but it obviously is a reminder that, there is life beyond Mexico City. And while sometimes life is arduous and tragic, as she certainly experiences in this film, there's something about those planes in the sky and how they're shot here, which is elegant and beautiful and arguably hopeful. And I think it's suggestive that our worldviews don't always have to be grounded, that we can move from one experience to the next and not be stuck in the same place forever, which I think is quite indicative of what Cleo goes through. Again, going back to what you were just saying about the opening and closing, those bookend shots and what it means for Cleo. I think there is connective tissue there, which is why I think it's very purposeful that in that final shot, as she's ascending those stairs, of course, there's a plane flying through the sky at the same time, which I love that.
Agreed. I like how, the plane, I think, represents a very specific thing, but there's always, something going on in the background. Whether it's the plane or a guy getting shot out of the cannon, the world is almost constantly larger than life. Yeah. Just in the way you just sit there and watch it, there's always something going on. It's really remarkable that it was choreographed so well, and I'm curious to know how much is actually CG, I can't tell, but how much is added in post. But it's just so entertaining to watch all the stuff going on in the background. But yeah, I just really enjoy that those moments in the movie.
Well, and speaking of choreography, can we talk about how active the camera is and the choreography involved there? Because that was pretty stunning throughout this film.
Absolutely. It's always panning, always moving.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you kind of expect, right? Because it is Alfonso Cuarón, and that is that's a motif. Thing. Yeah, that's something he loves to do. But I do think there is evocative precision with how he utilizes the camera here. A couple of examples that I really love. There's a scene where the family is going to bed and Cleo comes downstairs and she's turning off all the lights. And as she circles the room, the camera does a complete 360 paralleling her movements perfectly. But I don't think it ever panders to the audience in that. I feel like as Cleo is moving around, it's natural to how she would be in the moment. But there is impeccable choreography there between that rotating camera and where Cleo always finds herself. And the timing of all of that was pretty great.
Absolutely. And another thing, or another scene that I also really appreciated is what you mentioned earlier is the scene where she's washing clothes on the roof.
Yeah.
And the children come to play. And one child gets mad at another child because he doesn't play the game that he wants to play or something. And he gets mad and pouts and walks away. Yeah. The kid flops down on the skylight on the roof, and she lays right next to him. And the camera pans up, and we go all around, and we start to see the landscapes in the background. Yeah. And it changes from close-ups and medium close-ups to extreme wides. Yeah. And there's this sense of like flowing movement at all times. So you really understand this moment and this time, what is happening, what it felt like. Yeah. What, they were looking at just beyond the camera, because you're going to spin around and look at it in a minute, you know? You're going to live there with these people.
I just really feel like through the camera work, you really feel like you're part of the family, or you get Cleo's perspective very well defined for you. And by the end of the movie, because of the perspective of the camera, it does the work. There's a lot of characters in there and stuff like that, but the camera does so much good work in putting you in the mindset of the family and being just a part of it. Like Cleo, you're a part of the family by the end of the film, you know?
Yeah. Which is what I love about the beach scene at the end, where you get this one take shot of Cleo initially on the beach about 20 yards out, and she sees the kids in trouble in the water and rushes toward the water, jumps into the water and takes an action to save them, and the camera follows her all the way, even into the ocean.
Oh, and the camera doesn't even move. It's so smooth. And while she's being blasted with waves.
Exactly. And you are, it's so immersive, and it speaks to what you were just talking about, that like I felt the dramatic urgency of the moment, and because we're following Cleo the whole way, we're witnessing her going from this other kid and, you know, being normal in the moment on the beach, having fun, and then all of a sudden it's panic mode. And I think the camera following her the entire way, you get to see that distress at a pretty significant level. I love that. Great craftsmanship there.
Yeah, and even within like the same shot almost, or maybe just like 90 seconds earlier, we just got done being told she can't swim.
Yeah,
yes.
right. It is
so
in
the
the same
stakes
shot.
are even higher in that scene than they would have been.
I love how in that scene, and at some point, I hope that there's some sort of behind the scenes takes, but the little kids' heads just pop out of the water, and it's just remarkable. The audience I saw it with, you know, the tissue people were pointing. They're like, "Oh, there he is!" You know, like go get him. You know, and they're so into it. It's just that scene, and of course the scene where she. The pregnancy scene where she begins to go into labor. Those are the two.
Oh my God!
Just tension.
We have to talk about that.
Yes,
but I don't want to. I don't want to move off the beach
yeah.
just yet, because I wanted to say one thing before we move off that.
Sure.
I had lost track of how many kids were in the water missing.
Me too.
Yeah.
So when she went back to the beach, I was like, "You're not done yet."
Yeah, there's one more. I thought there's 3 in the
He's
water.
gonna die. I was so scared, and then I was so happy when they all just collapsed on her as a family, and then the poster moment happens.
I'm so angry in some ways that's the poster moment, because it's
Right.
It's such a pivotal part of the film.
Right, it's
and
a beautiful moment, right? But like, let the movie be out for a while first before you make that.
I know.
Make that
I know.
So
the 20 years later remastered edition poster.
this is what I'm going to tell you guys. This is how I felt about it. So oftentimes when I read a book, I will read the last sentence.
So you can ruin the whole book for yourself?
No, because I have no idea what the last sentence means. So then when I read the whole book and the last sentence is in context, it means so much more to me.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with the poster.
The sentence of some book you read next is like, and then he died terribly.
I know.
I'm sorry, go on.
Anyways. No, that's just what I'm saying. That's that poster moment. I got extra satisfaction out of having seen the poster.
Oh, you were like,
that's just me.
This is
I was
the
like,
moment.
it all makes sense now. Yeah, and it was beautiful.
It's still very well earned. Yeah, it's still beautiful.
I agree.
Sure.
It's not like the moment doesn't work, but I totally agree that it's such a beautiful moment that had I not known that was going to happen.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, the baby scene.
Oh boy,
echoes of Children of Men.
Yeah.
Whew.
Right, like once the riot took place in the furniture store and her water broke, and especially after being just faced with Furman, is that how you say his name?
I believe so.
Yeah, whom we haven't really mentioned yet, and we probably should. Her baby daddy, Furman.
Yeah.
That guy, you want to hate him, and you probably do and should. But given the backstory that they talked about earlier in the film when they were
I think that's important. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, in the hotel room. He's had a very tragic life. And he's fallen in with the wrong people, and he knows he's fallen in with the wrong people.
Yeah. And there is a self-awareness there. Mm-hmm. And even with the father character of the our main protagonist, once Cleo gets to the hospital, there's an interaction he has with Cleo, and he's very careful, and he's very nice to her. He's very endearing in that moment. And I love that Cuarón goes out of his way to give those guys a little bit of nuance, even though they kind of are working as our antagonists here. There's something more to them than just being one-note villains, quote unquote villains. There is humanity still to them, and I appreciate that
at
about
least.
the film. Yeah.
They both have shame. Furman, neither one of them have courage enough to act on their shame, but the fact that Cuarón cared enough to give them shame, I think, is important, right?
That matters.
Furman's not going to come back and not be violent and raise his baby. He has no intention of doing that, just like the father has no intention of actually being there for Cleo when she needs him, much less his entire family. But he still has the shame to be like, oh no, I see her. I have to make excuses for my behavior. You know, I have to ask about her. I have to try to care.
And that's why that dramatic irony of the furniture store scene is incredible, right? Because he is, in a moment, he's forced to confront that directly, where he has abandoned her, but he's self-aware that he knows he's had this troubled past, and he's trying to cope with it through this martial arts activity or whatever he's doing. But
and violent
when
protest.
He's in that furniture store, he sees her, knows she's pregnant, knows that she's there to buy this crib. And so he's seeing the reality of something that he's tried to push away. And I think there's something in the performance there, that shame that you're talking about, that I think comes to fruition there in that moment he has there. It's a pivotal scene in the film that I think is wonderful.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of choreography, there's so much going on in that scene, and I've harped on this, but as the camera passes by the window, you see these riots happening in the streets, and it's just so remarkable. And the tension, before she even has the baby, the tension's already at a 9, and then the baby happens and it goes up to a 12, and it's just so good, so tension filled that it's just amazing, I think.
Yeah. Now, how about that shot?
Yeah.
That long, tragic, terrible, wonderful shot.
Oh my gosh. So, and I find that so interesting too, because it's almost working the complete antithesis to how active the camera had been throughout the entire film.
Yes.
Where, we've been talking about all these panning shots, the tracking shot on the beach, which is so wonderful. And here's a stationary shot where we are just, we see Cleo in the foreground. She's having the baby, looking over to her left, trying to, she just has to wait it out and see what happens. And we see the baby in the background, and there's something out of focus. And there's something so matter of fact about how Cuarón shoots that is incredibly tragic. And as a father, obviously this is any parent's worst nightmare. And I was so devastated by the simplicity of that shot of Cleo there in the foreground, desperately, just waiting to see what happens. And you just have this little baby that is completely lifeless in the background. Oh my God, guys. I was devastated.
Yeah, that was my squeaky moment where
you let out an audible squeak.
Yeah, I was like,
yeah.
Well,
that was rough.
And it just stays on her performance, right? And it's like you said, JD, she's waiting. She doesn't know what she feels yet. It's probably sadness. It's probably devastation. But right now they're trying to do CPR on your baby. So you're like, well, maybe, right?
Yeah.
And the longer it goes, the less likely it is to happen. And we know
it's haunting, man. It's disturbing.
Well, and it's also I'm sure anyone who's ever gone through 9 months of pregnancy, this is a nightmare scenario.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And she keeps it so internal. And the performance is just beautiful in this moment.
Yeah.
If she doesn't get some kind of recognition for all of this, it's going to be crazy. She's not even a professional actress. I mean, she may be professional now.
She's a teacher, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, preschool teacher. And her mom does the job that she portrays in this, which is remarkable.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to talk also about the fire. Okay. The part where the guy stopped and started singing.
Yeah.
I think that was probably the most Fellini thing in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't know if you guys have seen a whole lot of Fellini, but...
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. If you liked Roma and you like that scene in particular, watch Armicord.
Okay.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful movie about Fellini looking back at his childhood town. It's a lot like this movie, but way more romanticized.
Mm-hmm.
Way more like nostalgic.
Okay.
But the fire scene, in my opinion, is just so wonderful. You have the whole family out there hanging out, having like this big party, basically out in the wild, shooting guns, having a picnic, hanging out at some small village somewhere. And you have extended family there, and you have everybody, And no matter what culture you're from, you can probably relate to that moment, right? We've all had some extended family backyard cookout or get together or whatever, patio party. You may not have had a fire in your family, right? But you've had like some kid gets hurt or some uncle shoots himself in the foot or, whatever. Like, I don't know. You have these moments that they feel real and they feel true.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, you're not in Mexico and you may not have had a fire and you don't have parties just like this, it feels, these people. You have family yourself. You can identify with it and you can understand that some things are the same anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. It's a lot like Tokyo Story that we were talking about last week, but we couldn't be any more further removed from a lot of these people in where we are now and who we are. But because of the story as just humanity, it's universal, and you can't help but feel attached to these people, even though they're so different.
Yeah.
It's a Roger Ebert thing about empathy, movie being empathy machines. It's just great.
Well, yeah, to bounce off of that specifically, I actually think that's one of the bigger components of the film to me, going back to some of these themes we've been talking about of, this family bonding through this tragedy and overcoming the male abandonment that these, characters have experienced. And that is in itself, I think, something a lot of us can relate with. And I do think Cuarón does a pretty gracious job of tapping into how vulnerable that makes you and why it's important to have people around you to help you cope with it, to show you that empathy. And for me, there are so many great little things that Cuarón does in this film that makes that so palpable for me. So, for example, the scene where the grandma of this family takes Cleo to the hospital, which, as we talked about, was a pretty pivotal moment. And even though she doesn't know much about Cleo, she was still emotionally moved by what was going on there. Or even the scene that takes place at that small village, prior to the fire. There's another maid that takes Cleo to this New Year's Eve celebration and wants to share this meaningful moment with her as she's coping through this pregnancy. Or there's the scene where Sophia shows grace to Cleo when she tells her that she's pregnant. Or the beach scene, as we talked about earlier, which may be the most stirring example. There's no doubt that this film is reflecting on, all those ideas we talked about. And specifically, I think Cuarón is suggesting that, obviously we can't do this alone. Like, we need people around us to help us cope. And,
absolutely, yeah.
And I think he does that so well by making all of these characters so engaging and rich and just mesmerizing to watch on screen. So by the time you get to that poster shot at the end, I felt it. I felt the weight of that, even though I knew that was coming. And I think a lot of it just has to do with those little moments of empathy that they can feel like throwaway moments, but they build to something momentous, I think.
Yeah, we all need people. We need each other. Like, life is not anything without the relationships we make.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that in itself just goes back to the general point of this film. If I had to boil everything down, all those ideas, all those shots, all those scenes just comes back to how Cuarón took that for granted as a kid. And he needed to pay respects to that by making this movie.
Yeah, almost like an atonement of sorts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also, you can't blame him. We were all young once, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kids are self-centered jerks.
And the kids in this film are definitely that.
Yeah. Kids do not care about what's going on with their housekeeper. right? They just know that she's
Exactly.
nice, she's there, and she takes care of them, and that's all they need to know.
Exactly.
They love her. They may not exactly understand the situation and what she's going through.
Right. They love
Personal.
her in the way a kid can love someone, but like,
Yeah.
it's not till we get older and we empathize and we've been hurt and we've lost that we really look back. Like, there are times I look back at some of the things I said and did when I was younger, and I think I would not do that now, right? I would apologize right there, or I would I would
I
change
feel like
my
I need
approach.
to call him up and apologize for something that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, remember that time?
Yeah, exactly. So like you get older, and that's part of what it is, and I think that's what this Alfonso Cuarón is exploring here, which is that he got old one day and looked back and was like, that woman was a miracle.
Yeah. And then he made this breathtaking film.
Yeah, and then he made a miracle.
Yeah.
Incredible.
I saw an interview with him, and she got to watch the film Lebo, I believe is her name. I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but he said that he had watched it, or they'd watched it together at a premiere of some kind, and she was crying, and he felt like maybe I'd crossed a line, and it was too intimate, and he shouldn't have done it. But he said that she couldn't have been more grateful, or she just loved it. Yeah, so I feel
that makes me so happy to hear.
Yeah, it's a good. I'm sorry, I think.
Yeah, and it's also a good, like, well, I don't think an apology is necessary, but I think it's just like an acknowledgement of like, hey, I really love you and I appreciate you. You know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think we should move into some listener questions. We have 2 questions, one from Facebook, one from Twitter, and I say we dive in.
All right, let's do it.
So the first one we have is from Facebook, Matt Ward. He says, I haven't seen Roma yet, as I'm unable to drive 90 minutes to see a movie I can see at home in a week, which is a massive flaw in Roma's inevitable Oscar campaign. Is there a communal experience to watching Roma in a theater that is lost on a Netflix viewing? While I realize that the visual experience of Roma changes based on how it's viewed, I'm wondering if Roma isn't a film that would be better seen with others, say in an empty art house theater.
Well, maybe not an empty art house theater. I've been talking about this whole movie and the communal experience that I had with everybody that saw this film. So I think we all know my answer. It definitely enhanced it for me, seeing this with a group of people, especially a group of people that were really excited to see this.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I saw this in a theater as well, and I think it was worth it. I think everyone who was there, and obviously in a Dallas art house movie theater, was probably excited to see the movie.
Yeah,
so
I think so.
I imagine the crowds that are in the movie theaters are almost exclusively good, because no one who's not excited about Roma is going to go out of their way to see it. So, yeah, I would say if you can, definitely see it in the theater. If anything, like I said earlier, just for the sound alone.
Yeah, I do think that it's worth the theater experience. I think maybe more so than the cinematography. And I do think the camera work is great for all the reasons we've already talked about, but the sound design of this film is really quite something. And I don't know if you guys had the same experience or not, but because of the mixing of this film, and there are times there are conversations being had and they're soft and they're quiet, and the mixing will come from one side of the room, and it sounds like there are
people
like
behind
3
you talking?
people, talking to you behind you. Like, you just want to turn around and be like, "Will you shut up and try to watch the movie?"
Yes, I had that exact same thing happen twice, and I was like, I turned around, and like my audience was mostly Hispanic people who were excited to see the movie, right?
Sure.
It was mostly, it looked like Spanish speaking audience. And so I genuinely thought it was like them talking to each other behind me, and I kept turning around, and then there was like no one immediately behind me, right? Like it felt like the sound was, and then I realized it was just really amazing sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just the mix of the film.
I had the same experience, exactly.
Yeah, and I found that really interesting. And so, there's so much going on a technical level with this film that is great. So yeah, the sound mixed with the cinematography, and I think it's just easier to catch maybe some of, again, the subtler moments of this film. And there are a lot of quiet moments, and there's obviously a lot of attention to detail regarding that symbolism that I think seeing it on a big screen is is helpful if you can do it. I don't think it's a be-all, end-all. I think you can have a great experience watching it at home. Don't watch it on your goddamn phones, though.
No.
I swear to God, I will come after you if I hear that. But watch it on your television, good-sized television, you'll be all right.
I very much agree on that one.
And preferably with some bass, like at least a sound bar, if not surround sound, if you can do it.
Yeah, that would be helpful, yeah.
So our next question is from Mindy at Songbird3411 on Twitter. The sound design, ! You must talk about that, ! Or the way that the camera framing and movement connects the intimate personal story with a larger socio-political situation. So, yes, we did just talk about the sound design. So we got that covered, Mindy.
Yeah. But specific to her point, though, I would say my favorite sound moment in the movie is when they are in that furniture store and the riot breaks out outside. Mm-hmm. And you just hear the mass swarm of footsteps running down the street and all the destruction and like violence taking place and carnage outside. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right as the camera pans over and looks out the window, that was probably the moment in the movie that the sound hit me the hardest. Mm. And I was so glad that I saw it with loud speakers.
And that whole scene in a general sense, I think, works as... that scene, I think, is a great reflection of the entire experience as a whole, where you have this scene at a furniture store, right? This place about domesticity and people buying items for their home. It's supposed to be this thing of comfort, and it's interrupted by violence and trauma. That's the entire film.
Yeah, that's life summed up.
Good point.
Yeah.
Very astute. Nicely done, JD.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the kind of insightful commentary you guys can find over at the InSession Film Podcast.
Yeah, we try anyway.
Yeah.
Don't always succeed, but we try.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we have anything else?
No, just I urge people to see this film as soon as possible. It is worth the accolades it's going to receive this award season.
Yeah. Speaking of, what do you guys predict? Do you think best foreign language, or do you think it's going to get a straight up best picture nod?
I think it's going to.
In an ideal world for me, Roma would be nominated, maybe even win for best picture, and Shoplifters wins best foreign language film. That's the ideal scenario for me.
All right. Fair.
I think there's no way that Roma's not nominated in the Best Picture category. Yeah. I don't think it's going to do Best Foreign Language. I believe it's going to be Best Picture, unless something with Netflix, they're resentful of that or something.
Right.
Well, it needs to be Best Picture.
Do you think that nominating it for Best Picture instead of Best Foreign Language will also kill its chances of winning either?
It's possible.
Yeah.
Because if it's in Best Foreign Language Film, I don't think it's a contest.
No, definitely not.
Which is kind of sad, though, because I do think Shoplifters is equally as good. And let's not forget, that film won the Palme d'Or earlier this year.
Yeah,
and I didn't see everything that was shown at Cannes, but Shoplifters is absolutely worth it as well in every way. So... those two films are neck and neck, and Cold War I don't think is too far behind. I don't think it's quite on the level of Roman Shoplifters, but
as far as public awareness,
I'm sorry.
As far as public awareness, or as far as
as far as quality goes, I mean, Cold War is the disparity, the gap between between Cold War and those other two is not very big, but I think Shoplifters and Roma are just in a league of their own. And Shoplifters it's not on Netflix. It doesn't have the notoriety. It's from a region of the world that's farther than Mexico. So it just hasn't garnered the same notoriety, but I think in terms of quality, it's on par with Roma. So, but in terms of how the Oscars works, because of that,
politics and whatnot.
Yeah, and because of politics, Roma has a much higher chance to win or to get into Best Picture, and it would destroy Best Foreign Language Film. But that's why I would love to see Shoplifters have that opportunity, because I think if Roma can win Best Picture and not compete for Best Foreign Language Film, I think Shoplifters can easily take it at that point.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And not that actual quality ever really wins out in the Oscars.
No.
But
Yeah.
I genuinely feel like this movie might be the best picture of the year, right? So like,
Yeah.
who knows? You know, like if it gets nominated, I would love that because right now I don't have like a personal other favorite that I would be rooting for.
Yeah, like I said, I still need to watch Burning and Shoplifters
Yeah, exactly,
too.
exactly.
Cold
But,
War,
yeah,
catch
anyway.
up on some, and The Favorite. Yeah,
Well,
but-
and it's also interesting and a bit ironic too, because what is it going to be competing against? A Star is Born? Like,
Black
and
Panther.
And
Yeah.
I
Right.
like some of those other films. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed A Star is Born, but if we're comparing quality, I just
Night and day.
from what I can tell is going to be in Best Picture. Nothing comes close to Roma.
Exactly. That's
Not
kind
even
of what
Black
I'm
Panther? I mean-
saying too, I think, as well. Like, I can think of other movies that will get nominated that I liked, but
Yeah.
genuine Best Picture, I think, Roma, The Favorite, which would not get nominated at all, but I think The
Yeah.
Favorite. in
And
a
I haven't
perfect
seen
world
that
would.
one. I'm seeing that this weekend, so
Yeah.
I can't fully say. But Lanthimos, in a general sense, is just not for everybody.
Right.
So it's hard for. In Black Panther, culturally, maybe that's its biggest contender. I think in terms of quality, I still think Roma's in a league of its own.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Black Panther.
That was a
it's
joke.
important,
I meant it as
but
a
it's
joke.
not a.
No.
right.
It's not a. Yeah, it's not Roma.
But it is gaining a lot of steam. I mean, to say Black Panther is a contender, that's a real thing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it could go either way because I mean, like the political pressure the Oscars are under to include it. Like, I think that's what the whole Best Popular Film category was all about. And then they can't do that anymore, so they're like, crap.
And some of these critics groups and precursors, I mean, it got nominated at the Globes. I mean, we all know the Globes is kind of a joke, but
Right.
I mean, a lot of these precursors so far, Black Panther is in the conversation. It's being nominated for Best Picture constantly right now, so it's gaining a lot of steam. I can see it happening, and I think if it does, I think it has a better shot than A Star is Born and some of these other ones
Yeah,
to beat Roma.
I agree. I would rather Black Panther win than A Star is Born, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
I don't really have a dog in this race either way because those aren't my favorite films of the year, but I like them both okay for what they are.
Yeah, me too.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just find the irony there, though, hilarious, though, because, I mean, nothing is going to compete against Roma. That's actually what I would consider, anyway, to be the best films of the year. So
Yeah.
it's just,
It's an odd year.
a runaway trade at this point.
Yeah, it's an odd year.
It is. And I don't, and last thought on it, too, has a foreign language film ever won Best Picture?
Ooh, Life is
I
Beautiful.
don't think that's ever happened.
Life is Beautiful, right?
Life is
Okay.
Beautiful immediately
Did it
came to
win?
mind for both Chris and I, so that might be a thing.
Did it win, or was it just nominated?
I know he won
Getting
like
to the bottom
Best
of it
Actor.
now. The Artist, but
Yeah.
that doesn't count.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah, that
see.
doesn't count.
Life is Beautiful. Now we got to know.
Yeah.
It could be a first.
Let's see. So, Best Foreign Language Film, Best Actor, Best Original Music Score, nominated for Best Picture but did not win.
But lost. Yeah.
Okay, so a bunch of nominations, 3 wins. Best Foreign Language Film being the best and biggest.
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Did that win
maybe?
Best Picture?
I don't think it won Best Picture. I don't think.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it says no foreign language film has been recipient of the Academy Award for Best Picture.
There you go. Okay.
But Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon had 10 nominations. So
So there have been a
Yeah,
few
that
that
was-
have come close. So the odds are not in Roma's favor, but hey,
that'd be interesting.
we'll see.
Yeah. We'll
Okay.
see.
So thanks so much for listening. Thank you, Jake Wagner Russell, for our intro and outro music. You can find more of his music at www.soundcloud.com/bopscotch. Our next episode will likely be over The Favorite or Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, or maybe both. We shall
I
see.
think you should, because that's exactly what we're doing on our next show as well.
Oh, nice.
So it'd be nice companion pieces.
Yeah. Nothing like some friendly competition. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at @CasualCinecast. Shoot us an email at casualcinemedia@gmail.com. Leave us an iTunes review, subscribe to the show, tell a friend, and remember to check out the InSession Film Podcast. JD, you got anything else you want to plug here?
Well, on our latest episode, 303, we gave a review to Roma as well. We also talked about Cold War, but we did a little bit more of a deeper dive than I did here with you guys. And we also gave some reactions to the Globes. And like I said, on our next show, we're doing The Favorite. We're doing Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And usually around this time, we kind of do these year-end lists on our show as well. So the first one we're going to be starting off with is what we call Against the Grain movies. So these are the movies that we liked that weren't well received.
Nice.
And then we're going to get into, funniest scene of the year, most heartwarming scene of the year, best scene of the year. And then in about a month, we're doing our award show. So it's very exciting. I love this time of year. And you can find everything about us at InSessionFilm.com. So that's links to social media, links to how to hear our show. And we're pretty much everywhere: iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud. I mean, anywhere you can listen to podcasts. And we have reviews, all kinds of content up at InSessionFilm.com. And thanks again, guys, for having me. This was a lot of fun.
No problem. And
It was our
I will
pleasure.
just state one more time, they are very prolific. They put out episodes all the time. They are always great quality, wonderful sound design, production.
Appreciate it.
Highly intelligent hosts, not just JD here. It's really just a gold standard for film
Thank you.
podcasts. So do yourself a favor and check it out.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for joining our show and giving us a little bit of that in-session film bump,
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to do it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, guys, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.